I've been testing out the new Sonos Arc Ultra soundbar, and I'm really impressed with the results. Turns out that big speakers like this aren't just for loud cinematic sounds, they also bring lots of detail to the vocals and other mids in all kinds of audio for TV, movies, even YouTube. So let's talk about the details of the installation and performance of this soundbar, look at the pros and cons, and see if it's the right option for your setup. I'm Eric Welander. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I've been an app developer on Apple platforms since 2011 and building out my smart home here on YouTube since 2018. So if you're into Apple or smart home tech, consider subscribing. Now, I love Sonos because they're a modular audio system and you can build out what works for you at that given time, not only for multi-room audio and music across your home, but also for the speakers in your TV setup or setups. So my TV setup started as a small TV where I added a Beam Gen 1, and fast forward to before I got the Arc Ultra, and I had an ultra short throw projector that AWOL Vision sent me because of this channel. I also had purchased a Beam Gen 2 from Sonos, as well as a Sub Mini and Era 100 surrounds. And I've talked about all those phases of upgrades of my TV system here on the channel over the years. And I was pretty pleased with the results, but I have experienced the sound from a Sonos Arc soundbar and realized how much that bigger soundbar did bring more detail to the sound, and it was something I was interested in. So when Sonos released the Arc Ultra, I jumped on the opportunity to see what it could do for my home theater sound. One of the other things I love about Sonos speakers is that they work great as AirPlay 2 speakers with all my Apple devices and my Apple Home, and this Sonos Arc Ultra is no exception there. So I can play Apple Music or any other music service from the Sonos app, but then I can also play via AirPlay with an Apple Home Scene or something straight from my iPhone to that same set of speakers. So setup of the Arc Ultra is very similar to a lot of other Sonos speakers, and I actually got the set with the wall mount from Sonos as well as the speaker. And the wall mount for the Arc Ultra was very straightforward to hang on the wall, just like a lot of Sonos wall mounts, but then getting the actual soundbar to hang into the wall mount took a little bit of fiddling to just get the screws. I had to unscrew the screws on the soundbar just a little bit to give it enough tolerance to slip into the slots. But once it was on the wall, everything was fine and it seems very sturdy. And even though the soundbar is pretty big, you don't need to screw the mount into studs on your wall. You can just use wall anchors going into the drywall. One of the big changes for the Arc Ultra over the Arc is the addition of these touch controls on the top. They sort of go on the back of the soundbar, as well as then behind the soundbar by the ports, there's a mute switch where you can turn off the microphone, which you can otherwise use for Sonos Voice Assistant as well as Amazon's Voice Assistant. Now, if you're setting up this speaker right around launch, you want to be sure and update your Sonos app on your phone. But setting up the Sonos Arc Ultra in my Sonos app, the app was really pushing me to do the TruePlay tuning. Now, that's fine, and this soundbar does support the quick TruePlay tuning, and I always like to do the TruePlay tuning eventually, but with a soundbar, you might be adding surrounds or a sub maybe that you already have or you're going to add in a minute, and that can really change the TruePlay tuning setup. So it's kind of annoying that if you're going through and setting up multiple speakers like this, it's not easy to opt out of the TruePlay tuning right after you set up just the soundbar. But Sonos seems to be very eager to work on their app these days, so maybe they'll address that before it maybe comes to your smart home. So once I added the Arc Ultra to my system, I then had to update my existing Sonos Beam Gen 2 and surrounds and sub in order to then be able to move the surrounds and sub over to the Arc Ultra. So if you're planning on replacing an existing Sonos soundbar with the Arc Ultra, you want to be sure you're still able to connect that to power and your home network just to make sure some of this stuff is taken care of. I think otherwise you'll probably have to reset speakers. It would be more complicated to do if you no longer have that old soundbar that the Arc Ultra could be replacing. Now, there are probably a lot of videos on YouTube that will break down every last detail of all the tweeters and woofers and transducers, but I do think there are some high-level details that are worth your attention here. The first is that in 2022, Sonos acquired a company in the Netherlands called Mate, and they apparently had a revolutionary approach to audio transducers, which it seems has now arrived with the Sonos Arc Ultra, and that enhances the audio performance, allowing Sonos to be even more detailed about how it puts audio into your room in different areas. The soundbar also has a significant amount of bass response with woofers inside of the soundbars, even compared to the standard Sonos Arc. And of course, Sonos will adjust the use of this bass accordingly if you happen to have a sub paired with the soundbar as well. Now, as far as audio performance, I was very impressed with how this soundbar can place sound around the room. This is something Sonos has already done with the Era 300, as well as their soundbars like the Beam Gen 2 and even the Arc as well. But the Arc Ultra takes this ability to a new level. When you're watching content on TV, you're just not even thinking about how the sound is coming maybe from the woofer or the surrounds. They really do a good job of immersing the room in that sound. If you listen really closely, you can start to notice stuff, especially as I was re-watching content, I'd start to hear some of the details of where the sound is coming from. But this setup really brings the sound to a new level of reality in the space. It makes it feel like you're actually there. Now, there are a lot of cool details that Sonos has with their soundbar settings with a lot of their soundbars, including the Arc Ultra. One of those is night mode. So if you want to reduce the bass and the loud sounds in whatever you're watching because it's probably night, you don't want to wake other people up, you can turn that on, and that's available here as well. One that you might want to keep on is the enhanced dialogue feature. Now, Sonos with the Arc Ultra gives you 3 options of amount of enhancing the dialogue, from low, medium, and high. I tend to like the medium setting when watching movies, but I do find then when switching over to something like sports, like watching Formula One racing, that it really brings the announcer's voice front and center, and you lose some of the environmental audio that might come with a sports broadcast when you have enhanced dialogue on. So I wish maybe there was a way that could somehow be automatically switched, where enhanced dialogue would come on in some kind of a movie mode, or somehow that could sync with your TV or your smart home to change that setting more dynamically. Right now you have to go into the Sonos app, into your system settings, and then turn this feature on and off. Now, personally, I think I'm probably just gonna leave enhanced dialogue on and just live with the more voice prominent sports broadcasts to have enhanced movies, but it is a little bit of a trade-off, and I am kind of splitting hairs here. It still sounds good in either case, and even if you have enhanced dialogue off, the Arc Ultra brings out so many more of the mid-range details that, depending on your preferences, you might not need enhanced dialogue on with the Arc Ultra, where maybe you did with a smaller soundbar like the Ray or the Beam Gen 2. Another thing I noticed is that after doing TruePlay tuning with my setup, that the Sonos EQ seems to lean more on the soundbar than it does the rear Era 100s that I have or the Sub Mini. I'm completely fine with this, and I'm overall very satisfied with the sound, but I did find it interesting that with the Beam Gen 2, I found it leaned a lot heavier on the rear surrounds to add more of that environmental ambiance to the sound. And with the Arc Ultra, it's able to just give that to me straight from the soundbar. That gets me to when you would want to buy the Arc Ultra and upgrade your existing setup, or maybe buy new into the Arc Ultra versus some other options from Sonos. So I think if you already have a Sonos Arc, that's an amazing soundbar. Well, I haven't used an Arc in my own home as much as I have the Arc Ultra. Long story short, I briefly tried the Arc and returned it a while ago. But if you already have an Arc, I think you're getting a lot of the benefits of the Arc Ultra. So unless you're really into all the details that the Arc Ultra adds, it's not going to be worth the extra upgrade for you. But if you have a smaller Sonos soundbar, let's say the Beam Gen 2, I think the Arc Ultra is a massive upgrade when you can swing it. Now, the Beam Gen 2 is still a very current soundbar with Sonos that supports Dolby Atmos and all the latest standards. So maybe not worth it to upgrade straight from a Beam Gen 2, but certainly with a Beam Gen 1, you'd see a massive step up moving to the Arc Ultra. And I think if you are buying a bigger soundbar, I would go straight to the Arc Ultra instead of looking at the Arc at this point. The Arc has an older processor, it has less memory, and so it just isn't going to have the performance to keep it going for as long as the Arc Ultra, especially with the price difference of only $100. Maybe if Sonos puts the Arc on big time sales and you're able to get it for $200 or $300 off of list price, then maybe the Arc starts to make more sense, but otherwise I go straight for the Arc Ultra. Another thing to consider is, let's say you have about $1,000 to spend on a home theater system and you're looking at potentially Sonos combination of the Beam Gen 2 with Era 100 surround speakers versus something like the Arc Ultra, which is not a surround system, but in that same price range. And I would still go with the Arc Ultra there, knowing that you could down the road add surrounds or a sub to the Arc Ultra. It already brings you so much power and capability in the soundbar alone. You are losing the physics of just having speakers behind your head, which does add an additional level of immersion that you don't get with just the soundbar. But this soundbar does such a good job of firing sound around the room that you're gonna get a bunch of that effect anyway. Another thing is if you're using a stereo pair of HomePods, since I talk a lot about Apple and smart home tech on this channel, I think that's comparable sound to something you get from a Beam Gen 2. Maybe this stereo pair of HomePods is a little better than a Beam Gen 2 in certain circumstances, but this Sonos Arc Ultra blows either of those options out of the water in terms of sound quality. Now, I'm pretty satisfied with my current home audio setup with this new Arc Ultra, but what would be the next upgrade I would be looking at for my system, and maybe to help you consider things, I think that adding Era 300s as the rears for the Sonos system would be a huge upgrade for me. I'm not necessarily in the camp of wanting the extreme bass of having the full-size Sonos sub. A sub mini is plenty of bass for me. I know for plenty of you guys out there, you might really want more bass of a bigger sub like the new Sonos sub that just came out. But I think rear Era 300s would really help that upward firing Dolby Atmos channel that's supposed to be above you and just add another level of immersion, and having more tweeters and more speakers behind you would probably help balance out what I currently have with the very strong Sonos Arc Ultra in the front and then weaker Era 100s in the rear. Now, speaking of home theater and TV watching upgrades, I have absolutely loved my ultra short throw projector that AWOL Vision sent me earlier this year, the LTV 3000, and I have that video linked here on the screen if you're interested in checking that out. And a special thanks to those of you who have just started supporting me by paying for my new Apple Home Weekly newsletter over on Substack. You can check that out in the description if you're interested. Give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. Thanks again so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.